The wind tore through Osprey Point like a beast with no mercy, ripping roofs off houses and tossing cars like toys. Timber snapped, glass exploded, and foundations groaned as if the earth itself was giving up. I counted 41 houses scream in the night while I sat behind 12 inches of concrete, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold. Then I saw her Carenza HOA president standing in the wreckage, eyes locked on my house. Not awe, not relief, hatred. Pure, deliberate, calculating hatred. And in that moment I realized the storm outside was nothing. The real storm was coming for me. Carenza didn't waste time. By sunrise, she was already on my lawn, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly coiffed, despite the debris, eyes scanning my concrete fortress like a predator assessing prey. From day one, she'd made it clear anything that didn't conform to her neat little world was a threat. My house, a 12-inch concrete wall laughing at hurricanes, a direct insult to her authority. She thrived on control. Small things mattered, a crooked fence, a single mismatched window, a tree planted too close to the curb. But I was untouchable, or so I thought. That made her obsession dangerous. The minute my survival became public, her gaze sharpened. It wasn't about envy anymore, it was personal. Then there was Bradley Greer, her lawyer, lurking like a shark. Silk tie, polished shoes, and that insufferable smirk. He knew exactly how to twist rules, bend bylaws, and make threats sound like community concern. Together, they were a machine, calculating, ruthless, and hungry to punish anyone who refused to bow to their version of order. Carenza's first real move was subtle, a phone call, sharp and trembling with forced authority. "Jack," she said, "your refusal to follow the community plan, it has consequences." Her voice wasn't angry, it was cold, deliberate. And in that split second I understood. The hurricane wasn't the only force I had to survive. The real danger was human, and it was already staring me down. I moved to Osprey Point in 2019, 8 months after retiring from 20 years of structural engineering on offshore oil rigs. Most people saw a tropical paradise, white sand, palm trees, the kind of place tourists take selfies. Me, I saw a moving target for hurricanes, a thin strip of sand perched above the Atlantic, where even the slightest storm could wash away decades of work in a single night. I didn't buy a house, I bought insurance against nature itself. Sarah, my late wife, had always been practical. Before she passed, she'd told me, "Jack, if you're going to do it once and do it right." That voice echoed in every calculation, every concrete pour, every pilings driven deep into bedrock decision. Windows rated for 200 miles per hour, projectiles, a monolithic roof tied to foundation like it was carved from a single stone, reinforced walls 12 inches thick. My neighbors called it aggressive. I called it necessary. From day one, the HOA hated it. Carenza, Karen, to everyone else, though I never used her name, was their president. Former beauty queen still holding on to every ounce of her past fame and obsessed with appearances and control. She tried to block my permits 3 separate times, citing aesthetic incompatibility. I told her aggressive is what the wind does. My house is just defensive. She didn't argue. She plotted. The neighborhood didn't help. For 2 years I was a joke. "Doomsday Jack," they whispered behind my back. Bradley Greer, the HOA lawyer, strutted past my construction site with a smug smile and poodle in tow, making thinly veiled jokes about nuclear bombs and Russian invasions. I'd wipe sweat off my forehead, say nope, just expecting physics to do its job, and he'd laugh the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. Then came Hurricane Magnus. It formed off the coast of Africa and grew fast and merciless. By the time the models showed a hook toward South Carolina, the panic had already gripped Osprey Point. 3 days before landfall, the HOA sent a blast email, mandatory community protection assessment, $5,000 per house, non-negotiable. They promised flood barriers and wind deflectors. I read the specs and laughed. They were glorified sandbags and aluminum sheets, nothing more than theater. When Carenza called voice-tight authority mixed with fear, she insisted it was about community morale and social responsibility. I explained calmly my house was already a fortress anchored to bedrock, impervious to the storm. Her reply, "There will be consequences." And in that instant I understood. The hurricane outside wasn't the only danger. Osprey Point had its own storm brewing, and it was human, deliberate, and aimed squarely at me. The first signs were subtle. A drone hovering over my property at dawn, its camera trained on my roof. A neighbor's phone buzzing with HOA alerts about non-compliant structures. Minor infraction notes left on my door. Passive-aggressive emails from Carenza complimenting my engineering skills before warning me about community cohesion. It was unsettling, like someone tapping on your window in the dark. But I was prepared. My cameras caught every move. My reinforced doors kept everyone out. Still, the tension built. Every friendly wave from a neighbor felt like a calculated threat. The neighborhood was watching, judging, cataloging my competence as if it were a crime. Even local news caught wind of my miracle house, posting drone footage online. Millions of views. Praise poured in from strangers across the country, but each positive comment only fanned the flames of local resentment. I realized then that being prepared in Osprey Point wasn't a blessing. It was a provocation. And Karenza's eyes gleamed in every message, every glance like a predator savoring the hunt before the first strike. It escalated fast. Contractors hired by the HOA crossed my property line to inspect my yard. They snapped photos of my windows, my walls, even my generator. A handwritten note appeared on my driveway. Non-compliance will result in penalties. Then came the call. Karenza, her voice trembling with feigned authority, lectured me about community solidarity. She demanded my cooperation in installing emergency sandbags, the same flimsy barriers she had convinced the neighbors to pay $5,000 each for. I refused calmly. My property is already hardened. Sandbags are theater. The tension wasn't just bureaucratic, it was personal. Her eyes, cold and calculating, bore into me every time we spoke. Bradley Greer sent thinly veiled legal threats. Every day I felt the invisible walls closing in. Trespass, intimidation, veiled threats. All meant to force me to conform. All failed. But the harassment worked in one way: it sharpened me. I started logging every action, saving every email, recording every call. Every small violation would later become ammunition. When Magnus finally landed, Osprey Point turned into a war zone. Roofs peeled off like paper trees, skewered cars, and streets became rivers of black sludge. Houses I had waved to just last week were now piles of splintered wood and scattered belongings. I stepped outside my fortress. My place was untouched. Not a shingle missing, not a window cracked, just a faint scuff from a flying patio chair. Relief should have hit me, but instead I felt eyes on me. Resentful, angry eyes. Neighbors who had mocked me for 2 years now looked at me like I had cheated death, and that alone was a crime in their book. Then came the HOA's ultimatum. Bradley Greer, smooth and predatory, claimed my house had deflected the storm's force, worsening damage elsewhere. The board had voted to issue a $12 million assessment. My survival, they said, had cost everyone else. It wasn't the storm that threatened me now. It was my neighbor's need for someone to blame. And the first crack of fear hit me sometimes. Competence is treated like a crime, and in Osprey Point I had just been indicted. Legal threats arrived faster than the morning sun. Bradley leaned on bylaws and obscure clauses, painting my survival as community harm. Foreclosure loomed like a guillotine. I couldn't fight with anger alone. I needed evidence. I dug through HOA records, cross-checked invoices, and traced Coastal Resilience Solutions LLC, the company that supplied the emergency barriers. Registered just weeks before the Storm Shell Corporation in Delaware, nothing legitimate. And then I found a sloppy accountant's digital fingerprint linking all transactions to Greer's law firm. Insurance claims added fire to the powder keg. Tom, a neighbor and reluctant ally, revealed the barriers weren't just useless. They actively worsened damage-blocking vents, funneling water into homes. The HOA had stolen, lied, and sabotaged. I had the documents, the digital trail, the testimony. Bradley and Karenza were exposed on paper, but to win, I needed the stage, the public forum, where their lies could crumble in front of the community. The public hearing loomed like a final hurricane. My $12 million levy hung over me like storm clouds. Hundreds of neighbors would watch, expecting humiliation, expecting me to bend. Instead, I walked in with every piece of evidence, every email, every invoice, every insurance note. Tom stood quietly at my side, witness and anchor. Bradley's confident smirk faltered when I projected the first slide payments from Coastal Resilience Solutions to Greer's law firm, dated 2 days after the assessment collection. The room went silent. Karenza's eyes widened. Bradley tried to talk over me, but I clicked to the next slide email chains, joking about selling sand to people on a beach. Laughter bubbled in the back of the room, not at me, but at them. I had turned the tide. The board's power, built on fear and false authority, was gone. The levy, the threats, the lies, all shattered under the weight of facts. My neighbors weren't just witnesses, they were jurors, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a taste of vindication. The storm outside had passed. But this storm, the one I had survived while uncovering the corruption, it was the one that finally leveled the playing field. The hearing room smelled of wet wood and storm debris. Hundreds of neighbors filled the seats, some still in soaked jackets, faces hardened by loss and frustration. Corenza stood at the front, immaculate as ever, arms rigid on the podium. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a flicker of doubt now. Bradley Greer, smooth and predatory in his tailored suit, had his usual smirk, but it no longer reached his eyes. He began with his rehearsed speech. "Mr. Jack, your refusal to comply with the community assessment has caused inequity, compromised resources, and forced us to act." His voice was calm, almost clinical, painting my survival as an offense. Corenza added her tone, icy yet controlled. "This isn't personal, it's about social responsibility. You benefited while your neighbors suffered. We must restore balance." I leaned forward, plugging in my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a glow on my face. The room went silent, anticipation heavy in the air. Neighbors expected a fight, a concession. Instead, I was about to expose every lie, every scheme, every fraudulent move hiding behind their authority. The tension was electric, and in that moment I knew the hurricane outside had been a warning. The real storm was about to hit inside these walls. The first slide displayed invoices from Coastal Resilience Solutions LLC. Payments were traced directly to Greer's law firm, dated 2 days after the HOA collected the $5,000 assessment from each home. A low murmur spread through the room. Eyes widened. Breath caught. Bradley's jaw tightened. Corenza's hands clenched. Next, the email chain appeared, mocking jokes about selling sand to people on a beach. Residents who had lost everything stared at the screen, shock and disbelief washing over them. The HOA hadn't just failed, they had profited while people's homes were destroyed. Then came Tom's testimony. He explained how the cheap barriers worsened flooding, how insurance claims were denied, how the HOA had actively sabotaged its own community. Every word landed with surgical precision. Every witness, document, and record built a dam around the truth that could not be broken. The room shifted from anger at me to fury at them. The weight of evidence transformed suspicion into undeniable proof. Corenza's perfect posture crumbled. Bradley's smirk vanished. For the first time, the crowd wasn't a mob, they were jurors. And they were watching their leaders unravel. Bradley stammered excuses, tried to talk over me, but his voice was drowned out by the collective gasp and outrage. Corenza attempted to reassert authority, but the room no longer listened. Phones buzzed with live updates. Attorneys from the state stepped forward, subpoenas in hand. Questions rained down like hammer blows: kickbacks, fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Bradley's face flushed purple. Every practiced line crumbled under scrutiny. Disbarment, criminal investigation, jail. Corenza's eyes darted around, panic overtaking poise. Her empire of control and appearances collapsed in real time. The levy, immediately nullified. The board, restructured. The stolen funds, traced and partially recovered. The neighbors, still reeling from the hurricane, now stared at me with a mixture of awe, respect, and disbelief. I had survived not only Magnus, but a human storm built on envy, greed, and authority. I hadn't just defended my house. I had exposed corruption and reclaimed justice for the community. Walking out, I felt vindicated, but the air was heavy. The storm outside had passed, but the scars remained. Homes were ruined, trust shattered, and Osprey Point had learned a lesson that would echo for years. Survival, competence, and truth were not crimes, and those who tried to punish them would fall. The day after the public hearing felt surreal. Osprey Point was a neighborhood frozen in the aftermath of disaster and revelation. Streets were clogged with debris, toppled trees, shattered furniture, and the remnants of lives torn apart. The smell of wet wood and salt hung in the air, mingling with the nervous tension of neighbors moving cautiously through the wreckage. My house stood untouched, gray concrete gleaming under the tentative sunlight, a silent, immovable witness to both the storm and the chaos it had unleashed. Some neighbors whispered words of thanks as I handed out bottles of water, lent extension cords from my generator, and helped pull belongings from ruined yards. Others looked at me with cold suspicion or barely concealed envy, reminding me that survival was never just about staying dry. It was also about how others perceived your luck and competence. Even the kindest gestures were filtered through the lens of resentment. The neighborhood had been fractured long before Magnus, but the hurricane had made the fissures undeniable. Late at night, I would climb onto my roof, looking over the shattered streets and listening to the calm Atlantic, thinking about Sarah. Her voice echoed in my mind, "If you're going to do it right." I had built a house to withstand a hurricane, but nothing could have prepared me for the human storm that followed. The isolation was heavy. Vindication had arrived, but it brought loneliness in equal measure. Some people would never forgive competence, and some would never understand that foresight was not arrogance, it was necessity. Bradley Greer's downfall was swift and merciless. The disbarment was only the beginning. Criminal charges followed: fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and he was sentenced to 5 to 7 years in prison. His polished smile, once a symbol of predatory confidence, became a mask for desperation. Carenza, the former HOA president, avoided jail only by cooperating with investigators. But the personal cost was severe. She lost her home, her reputation, and was forced to relocate hundreds of miles away to live with a sister she barely knew. The social responsibility levy, that $12 million punishment for surviving the hurricane, was instantly nullified. Tom, now chair of the newly restructured HOA board, hired a forensic auditor who meticulously traced and partially recovered the misappropriated funds. Not all losses could be repaired. Some neighbors had been irreparably damaged, but at least the scam that compounded their suffering had been exposed and addressed. Insurance claims were reopened, giving families a second chance to rebuild. The community's outrage transformed into cautious respect. Neighbors who had once laughed at me, mocked my fortress, or quietly resented my foresight now realized the full scale of the betrayal that had been hidden behind authority and bylaws. The storm had exposed more than roofs and windows. It had exposed character, greed, and the consequences of unchecked power. Justice had been served, though imperfect, and the HOA's lies could no longer hide in the shadows. I returned to my fortress, a gray monolith untouched amidst devastation, a testament to preparation, competence, and stubborn refusal to compromise. Neighbors regarded it differently now, some with awe, some with cautious respect, some with an unspoken acknowledgement that I had been right all along. The irony was sharp. I had prepared for hurricanes, meticulously calculating every beam wall and pilings driven into bedrock, but the real test had been human. I had survived the storm of nature and the storm of envy, greed, and authority. Sometimes late at night I climb onto the roof, looking out over the neighborhood. The ocean is calm, almost deceptively so. I know another hurricane will come. It's not a matter of if, but when. The lesson I carry is simple, yet heavy preparedness is power. Competence is a shield, and the crowd, jealous, fearful, vengeful, can be more dangerous than any hurricane. Yet there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing the truth is visible for anyone who dares to see it. I have the fortress, I have the evidence, I have the peace of knowing I stood firm when everyone else faltered. I sip my coffee, letting the wind carry my thoughts over the streets below, and wonder how many neighbors will finally understand that safety isn't selfish, it's necessary. Some will learn, some will never forgive, but I know one thing: I am ready for the next storm, and nothing, neither wind, water, nor human malice, will break me. And that finally is the calm after the hurricane.